Good afternoon. Welcome to the Louisiana version of our state webinar series, exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or to make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a question section of the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square on the right-hand side. That decouples it from the control panel. You can then type your questions in there, and we will be leaving time during and at the end of the webinar for questions. We are recording this webinar and we'll send the link to everybody who has registered. Please feel free to share this recording with others. Let me now introduce myself. I am Chris Coffin, American Farmland Trust Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Billy Van Pelt. Billy is AFT's Senior Director of External Relations and is based in Kentucky. Billy is focused on the expansion of AFT's national initiatives across the Southeast. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a quick introduction. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We work from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress. We are an agricultural land trust, but also focus on promoting sound farming practices through soil health and water quality initiatives. We recognize that it's not farmland without farmers. So we also focus on tools and strategies that facilitate land access for next generation producers and assist with farm transfer and succession for retiring farmers and farmland owners. Our programming and research informs our state and federal policy work. We have 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. And now let me turn it over to Billy.
Thanks, Chris. We are delighted to be joined today by a number of valued partners, including the Land Trust for Louisiana, Federation of Southern Cooperatives, Southern University Ag Center, several farmers and supporters from across the state, and USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. Thank you all for joining us today. We'd like to recognize and thank NRCS especially for their collaboration and support of this project. They've been an integral partner, as has our research partner in this project, Conservation Science Partners.
Thanks, Billy. So now we're going to talk about the findings from this report. Today we are focused on the State of the States, which is the second in this research series. State of the States paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who did not join us for our launch event last month, let me touch very quickly on our national findings. From 2001 to 2016, a period of historically low housing starts, the U.S. converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's the equivalent to all the land planted in the U.S. to fruits, nuts, and vegetables in 2017. The majority of that conversion was to low-density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one has ever been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized just how big of a threat it is. Importantly, more than 1/3 of the land converted, about 4.5 million acres, was what we have identified as nationally significant land, the land best suited for intensive food and crop production. As you can see from this next map, agricultural land conversion is a growing problem across the US and especially throughout the South. Cities are sprawling, and the proliferation of farmettes and ranchettes on their outskirts have created hotspots of conversion in virtually every state. So let's now dive into the data available for Louisiana on our new interactive website. And we will be ably navigated through the website today by Beth Fraser, our colleague and website navigator. So thank you, Beth. Let's start with the methodology. So the reports and data tab over here is where you'll find the fact sheets that describe the methodology. There's also the full report, the glossary of terms, the score sheet, many things. And if you are interested in getting access to the geospatial data we used, if you look at where Beth is pointing to the geospatial data layers, you would click on that. That will take you to a form, fill that out, and we will be back in touch to let you know what will be available and when it will be available. So now let's go to the drop-down menu and choose Louisiana. Here you can find both the spatial data and the policy scorecard findings. So we're going to start with the spatial data, and we're actually going to start with a downloadable summary that you can see here. It's a 2-page PDF. We did this to give stakeholders something that's easily downloadable, even with limited bandwidth, that has many of the most pertinent facts and statistics. Feel free to use this in newsletters, use it with reporters, use it with policymakers. We hope that it will be used widely for a number of different purposes. And I think that many of these graphics can be just grabbed from the PDF. If you need any of them, please let us know because we can get them to you. So now we're going to go to the 4 types of land use, and we're going to start with land cover and use. We used multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the US. You can zoom in on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low density residential development. That is the kind of burnt orange on this data layer. It also includes the first ever attempt to spatially identify woodland associated with a ranch or a farm. Our mapping shows 7.8 million acres of agricultural land, including 4.69 million acres of cropland, 2.13 million acres of pasture land, 66,000 acres of rangeland, and about 930,000 acres of woodland associated with a farm or ranch. So let's go now to PDR value. We wanted to quantify the quality of land that is being lost to development, not just the quantity. So with the help of a national panel of experts, we created an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map shows the range of these PDR values across the state. The darker the green, the higher the PDR value. And the higher the PDR value, the higher the suitability of the land for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. We used these PDR values to identify nationally significant land. So going next to that data layer, you'll see the nationally significant agricultural land in Louisiana. There are 6.38 million acres of land that fall into this category, which is a whopping 82% of the state's agricultural land base. About 4.3 million of this is cropland, with 1.5 million acres in pasture and about 500,000 acres in woodland. We are especially concerned about the conversion of this highly productive land for both economic and environmental reasons. When land with high PDR values is impacted by development, intensive food production gets pushed to more marginal lands. For farmers, that's going to mean input costs are typically higher and crop yields are typically lower. So that's an economic hit. It can also lead to more soil erosion and more demand for water for irrigation. The last category here is conversion. Here we looked at a 15-year period, again, this 2001 to 2016, so historically low housing starts with a deep recession. We mapped the conversion of agricultural land to two types of land use. The first is urban and highly developed land use. This includes the traditional culprits in farmland conversion, so expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas typically found in cities and towns. This category, though, also includes rural, industrial, and energy production sites, so it picked up some amount of oil and well pads and solar panel installations. The second type is low-density residential development, or LDR. Again, this is the first effort of its kind to quantify the extent of large lot housing on the agricultural land base. LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. A majority of conversion in Louisiana in this 15-year period, about 65% or 114,700 acres, was to this low density residential land use. It doesn't necessarily mean that there is no active agriculture on land designated as LDR. There may well be, and some of that small parcel production may be quite productive and profitable. But we also know that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. Land in the state that was considered LDR in 2001 was 11 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that continued conversion to LDR increases management challenges for producers who end up farming in and around non-farm neighbors. Total ag land converted over this period was 177,000 acres. Pasture land conversion accounted for almost 87,000 of that, followed by cropland with 69,000 acres, followed by woodland with almost 19,000 acres. And in looking at the quality of the land converted, over 80% of that conversion was land considered nationally significant. So with that, let me stop and turn it over to Billy for some additional perspectives about what we're seeing with the spatial findings.
Thanks, Chris. And I know that our colleague Beth is going to help us navigate on the map. Please note that Louisiana has a significant amount of nationally significant land and PDR land, productive, versatile, and resilient land. You can see that extending from northeast Louisiana south to almost to the coast, and then that vein of very productive farmland running from the northwest all the way down south past Baton Rouge. And then, of course, throughout all the counties, you can see the PDR land. But what we're seeing here is in red is the conversion that has occurred for over 15-year period. Do you see the gray that is the urban where we started, and then the red is all of the additional urban high density development and low density residential uses that have occurred over the 15-year period from 01 to 16. So for example, we can see across the northern part of Louisiana, where you have Shreveport on the west, all the way over to the eastern part of the states. What we've seen across the country and in other states is that cities and communities are sprawling out, and they have the potential to merge with each other. So we're seeing the patterns of development, the patterns of sprawl development, of smaller communities becoming larger. If we go south on our map, we can see the areas around the areas in southern Louisiana, and you see Lafayette there, and you have an urban area, but you have a lot of sprawl development in your best farmland, and you can see that it has really fragmented your agricultural land base. Lake Charles is somewhat contained. The growth areas to the in that area seem to be in a more compact, contiguous manner. And then as we scroll over to Baton Rouge, you can clearly see the sprawl that's taken place there, very much so. So these are all just examples. They're not unique to Louisiana. We're seeing these patterns across the United States and other states, but I just think it's critically important to note that Louisiana has a limited amount of excellent farmland, which is a call to action to protect that finite quantity now. And we're going to talk about those planning tools in the toolkit a little bit later during the webinar. And I'll turn it over to Chris.
Great, thank you, Billy. Before we turn to the policy scorecard, we want to stop and get some input from all of you. We're interested in your perspectives on what will drive agricultural land conversion over the next 10 to 20 years in Louisiana. We do this now because understanding and thinking about what those conversion drivers are going to be going forward will influence how we collectively think about what an appropriate policy response or responses should be for Louisiana. So let's take a minute. Please fill out this poll. You can vote for more than one. And if you think that there's another driver beyond any of these, feel free to write it in the question pop-out box. And if you're having trouble voting, it may be because you're in full screen mode and you have to come out of that to vote. Okay, Beth, what do we see here? So, everyone thinks that more of the same, both more and poorly planned residential, commercial, industrial development. That is very consistent with what folks have said in other states where we've done these webinars, and ditto with a growing number of people who are concerned that generational transfer is going to be a more significant challenge going forward. Not to say that these other ones are not going to be an issue. They certainly are, again, thinking about the profitability of agriculture and what can be done on that front, and the continued energy development, both renewable and non-renewable. So let's go then to the policy scorecard. Our intent with this scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address these traditional drivers of land conversion. So we were thinking about this poorly planned development, the fact that ag profitability is critical to keeping farmers on the land, and the vulnerability of land when it transfers between generations. This is our first effort at a policy scorecard, even though we have been involved in federal and state agriculture and conservation policies since our founding. We know that there are many ways that states support agriculture, and this is not an attempt to score them all. Louisiana and many others have programs that are focused on marketing, on ag development in a number of different ways, whether that's grants and loans, they work through extension. There are many ways that states continue to support the business of agriculture, but we wanted to focus on 6 specific types of policies and programs that tie directly to the land and address one or more of these conversion drivers. So the 6 policies and programs we looked at were: 1, the purchase of agricultural conservation easement, or PACE, or the purchase of development rights, PDR programs. These voluntary programs permanently protect farmland and ranchland from non-farm development. They compensate landowners who choose to place a permanent agricultural conservation easement on their property. And we see these programs not just as a way to ensure land for future generations, but as powerful tools for landowners, because the sale of an easement can transform part of an illiquid asset, land, into cash. These programs allow farmers and landowners to improve or expand their farm businesses, or to fund retirement without having to sell land for development. And that protected land is then typically more affordable for a younger farmer. We looked at land use planning and growth management. These are policies that are focused both on managing growth and stabilizing the land base. Most states, including Louisiana, delegate planning authority to local governments, and planning and zoning decisions are driven largely at that municipal level. As Billy will discuss, local governments must be equipped with a suite of effective tools to support compact development and retain agricultural land. States, though, can play an active and important role in guiding local planning and supporting local governments with the right tools and incentives to stabilize the land base. This is what this policy component measures. We looked at property tax relief. These are programs that reduce property taxes paid on agricultural land in recognition that working lands require far less in municipal services than the taxes typically levied on them. These programs are often called current use or use value assessment. We looked at agricultural district programs. This is not something that Louisiana has. 18 states have them. They encourage landowners to form special areas to support agriculture. The protection and incentives provided to the farmers and landowners in these districts vary by state. Some states limit annexation in districts. Some limit the use of eminent domain and offer protection from the siting of public facilities and infrastructure. Some offer tax incentives, and some require enrollment to participate in the state-administered PACE program. We looked at farm link programs. Again, this is not something that Louisiana has in terms of a statewide program per se. These types of programs connect farm seekers with farmers and landowners who want their land to stay in agriculture. They can be administered by public or private entities, and they offer a range of services and resources, from online real estate postings to technical assistance, trainings, and educational resources. And again, some of this type of work might be done by nonprofits, some of it might be done through extension in the state, but we are very supportive of the idea that states can play an important role in these kinds of linking between generations. And lastly, we looked at state leasing. State leasing programs are those that make state-owned land available to farmers and ranchers for agriculture. Sometimes that's their primary purpose, but more often, agricultural use is secondary on the state leasing to generating income for some other public purpose or for protecting wildlife habitat. So now let's look at how Louisiana scores relative to other states. And what I like to point out here is that some states, especially on the east and west coasts, have faced rapid loss of farmland for decades. And so these high scores that you see, which are the dark blue, reflect those states that on the coast that have had to take action for many decades to stem the rapid conversion of their farm and ranch land. And what we would say here is, as Louisiana begins to feel this development pressure more intently, it will, if it hopes to retain its agricultural land base for a profitable agricultural industry, it too will need to increase its policy response. So the website allows you to dive into the factors behind the scores, and you see this over on the select policy or program over here. We're going to start with land use planning. Let's look at the three scores, the three components where Louisiana has a score. And again, our intent on the land use planning is to look at how state government is guiding or enabling local land use planning in a way that supports agriculture. So Louisiana gets some points here for authorizing local planning and requiring any local planning commissions to develop master plans. Higher scoring states in this category have state goals around retaining their farmland and or promoting compact development. And those states incentivize or require consistency between those state goals and local plans. Some states provide support or incentives to local governments to develop farmland protection plans and strategies specifically. So let's look now, Beth, at property tax relief. Here, Louisiana gets high marks for the high percent of agricultural land enrolled under use value assessment. States that scored higher in this component impose withdrawal penalties under certain conditions for land taken out of use value assessment. Some states use those penalties to fund farmland protection at the state or local level. Some states also provide additional property tax relief in exchange for short-term non-development covenants. And then lastly, we included state leasing in this scorecard because we feel that making state-owned land available for lease is an important mechanism for identifying new land access opportunities, especially smaller plot parcels in and near urban areas. This is especially important in a state like Louisiana, where there are 4 times as many producers over the age of 65 as under age 35. High-scoring states in this category have done a comprehensive inventory of state-owned land and then leased it using an open and transparent process. Some have developed state incubator programs for new and beginning farmers. Louisiana seems to have the authority to lease land for agriculture, but we were unable to get any information about the extent to which that state-owned land may be leased to farmers. And let me just talk for a minute about purchase of development rights or PACE programs. While Louisiana does not have one, there is federal funding available for the purchase of permanent agricultural conservation easements. This is through both the NRCS Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, or ACEP, as well as through NRCS's Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP. Louisiana has used some ACEP funding for farmland protection, and we hope that the $2 billion provided in the 2018 Farm Bill, as well as key statutory changes, will increase its use in Louisiana moving forward. A couple of these changes, the elimination of the catch-match requirement for ACEP and the ability to do things called buy, protect, sell projects, we think will be especially valuable. The National Agricultural Land Network, which again I'll talk about a little bit later, will be providing some additional programming around buy, protect, sell later this summer. So I think that I will stop there. I hope that was a useful cruise through the findings. If you have questions, please feel free to write them in now. And as we go out of the website, we're going to launch another poll. which asks which policy or policies you think might be most valuable to focus on for Louisiana going forward. And my apologies, we do not have state leasing or FarmLink on here if we didn't have room to put them both in. If you feel that one or both of those are be most valuable to look at, then please write them in on your question line. So let's take a minute, and again, you don't need to be limited to one answer if you think multiple ones of these are important. Okay, let's see where we are. Okay, well, many things. So this is good that people want to focus on a variety of different tools. On this front, the National Agricultural Network will be hosting a series of policy webinars beginning in the early, which we hope will be a way for those of you who want to learn more about specific policy elements such as these to do so. We're going to dive deep into, for instance, what is a good agricultural district program? Why has it been valuable in those states that have it? If you were going to think about starting it, what would that need to look like? Ditto with many of these other tools. So it's going to be a deep dive into ways that these types of coming sooner about that. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. There's the one thing that's missing from our spatial analysis is protected agricultural land. And the reason for that is because there's not a national comprehensive data layer focused specifically on permanently protected agricultural land. We are building this new database now. If you have not heard from us and you are an entity that holds agricultural conservation easements, please let us know by adding a comment in on the question panel, because we will be back in touch with you to be sure that we get that data from you, because we want to include as much, we want it to be as accurate as possible. And it's good to see that there are so few, I see a few faint little green dots there, so I think we have some information. But with that, let me stop, Billy, and see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Chris. I don't see any questions, but please, if the audience has any questions at all, please type those in. I'll take this moment just to talk about conservation easements a little bit. Conservation easements are really critical to protecting farmland in perpetuity. As we all know, planning and zoning can be changed over time. And conservation easements are really the only long-term solution, permanent solution for protecting farmland. Chris, I don't see any questions, so I'll go ahead and go on to the next slide and just say that time is not on our side in saving farm and ranch land, which is why American Farmland Trust just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040 and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day to 500 acres a day by 2040. We know that to get to this goal, we will need to lock arms with as many of our partners and practitioners on this call and others across the United States who are deeply concerned about saving the land that sustains us. So right now, what I'd like to do is talk about some of the ways that AFT will be strengthening its commitment to farmland protection across the country and in the South especially. We've talked about establishing the National Agricultural Land Network and the importance there, providing new leadership in key locations. So American Farmland Trust is letting our data and research inform where we do our work in the future. And the South has been illuminated in our Farms Under Threat data. So we will be spending more time in the South supporting allied organizations, providing policy support, and opening 2 offices in the South. We want to protect more farmland ourselves and with partners. American Farmland Trust helped start numerous PACE and PDR programs and private land trusts across the country over the last 40 years. So we don't want to duplicate their services, but we will hold conservation easements where there is not a viable farmland protection program or land trust in place. We want to advocate for stronger state and federal policies. So please use our research to do so. And I'll also be available to go with you to meet with your state legislators on a state-by-state basis. And that's something that I'll give my contact information at the end of the webinar for you to contact me. And then promoting research-based decision-making. And this is the perfect segue to the next slide, which is where we're going to focus on what more Louisiana can do. We would like for Louisiana and our other states, our partner states, to analyze and map agricultural land trusts and conditions, land trends and conditions. What is this information telling you? And we touched on it a little bit during the webinar. Strengthen or adopt a coordinated suite of policies. So now I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the tools in the toolkit for farmland protection. So first, we have to plan for the future of agriculture. What does that look like? And the spatial summaries that we showed, showing the sprawl development over the last 15 years and where we are today, clearly we need to plan for the future of agriculture. Well, first, it's good across the country, and these are best practices, to have a professional planning staff and a planning commission to guide that process. Next, to have a comprehensive plan that is adopted as part of your local ordinance or local law, state law. Comprehensive planning is critical, and that the Planning Commission is adopting the comprehensive plan as a guiding document between comprehensive plan updates, which in many states are every 5 years. And then to embed a goal for farmland protection in that comprehensive plan. What is Louisiana's goal for farmland protection as a state? Next, around the cities that we saw on the spatial map, urban growth boundaries. Urban growth boundaries contain non-agricultural uses. Outside of those boundaries are agricultural uses. So you're separating the urban from the rural, and you're keeping the urban in a very compact, contiguous growth pattern rather than sprawl. And then your ag activities can happen in a very holistic way without being fragmented by non-ag development. Having large lot minimums in your rural area. And, we characterize our low density residential development as 5-acre tracts, 10 acres, 15 acres, 20 acres. Your minimum lot size in your rural area should be a viable agricultural unit. That's critically important. And then to have agricultural zoning. So you have zoning in your agricultural areas that is conducive to traditional agriculture, and it prohibits non-agricultural activities. And then finally, farmland protection programs. And these could take the place of the form of PACE and PDR, as Chris stated, and also land trusts that take donated conservation easements, or using the current guidelines in the ACEP, federal ACEP program, to use the landowner donation to leverage a 50% match from the federal government to purchase an easement. So we want to support farm viability, excuse me, and access to land, planning for agriculture, not just around it. And when we say that, we want the critical masses of agricultural lands protected. So we have the Holstein of agricultural land and not the Dalmatian. We don't want islands of ag surrounded by non-agricultural uses. That is not a good practice. And saving the best, but don't forget the rest. So we want to save your most productive, versatile, and resilient soils, your nationally significant soils. But then how do we plan for agriculture on the balance of those agricultural soils? And AFT has a suite of programs, for example, smart solar siting and putting that on your more marginal land. That's just an example. So I will turn it back over to Chris.
Great, thank you, Billy. We do have a question, and I'm hoping that if the questioner is willing, to ask them to clarify it. But the question is, can conservation easements for farmland protection be competitive with conservation easements for water resources conservation, i.e. wetland mitigation banking? Are there examples of this from other regions of the US? And if so, how was this accomplished? And I don't know, Billy, if you feel in a position to be able to talk about this. I don't particularly, and I was sort of going to ask a clarifying question, but maybe if you want to speak to it, I don't need to.
Well,
or we can ask
Chris,
go ahead.
Chris, I would say that we would like to follow up with this questioner with a written answer. I think it's part of a broader question, and we would want to get more specific information. Generally, I'll say that conserving farmland is part of protecting our water resources. And that's all part of American Farmland Trust strategy to protect farmland, because we're not just protecting acres of land, we want to protect inches of our best land, inches of those best soils, soils that help with water quality, soils that you can sequester carbon in, and that's a broader answer. And our questioner has agreed that written correspondence would work fine for her. So
Good.
we will go there. We just want to make sure that we answer the question thoroughly and in a way that the questioner feels like the question has been answered.
Right, and I think, I mean, I do think for a place, a state like Louisiana, where there is active wetlands mitigation banking, that there are, right, and this is where I don't know enough about the types of values that are being offered on that wetland mitigation, but I think it's a very important point of that you would want permanent agricultural conservation easements to be competitive with those other types of easements that are being offered. But again, this is not my particular area of expertise, so we will follow up on that, because I think it's a really important point in your neck of the woods. So with that, and mindful of the fact that where I am, we have a very big thunderstorm, and I'm a little worried about us losing power. So I think we should just go to this last slide if we can. And so let me talk for a minute about the Farmland Information Center and the National Agricultural Land Network. The Farmland Information Center, or FIC, is a collaboration we have had with Natural Resources Conservation Service for decades. It is a clearinghouse of information around agricultural land, and it includes resources for farmers, ranchers, and landowners, and for all of the practitioners who care about agricultural land. So for farmers, ranchers, and landowners. If you know someone, or if you are a farmer interested in agricultural land protection, you can go to the website, or you can either ask a question via email or pose it to somebody over the phone if you're interested in what makes for a good agricultural conservation easement. What are the kinds of things that I should be looking for? If you want information about the agricultural conservation easement program, we have many more resources that are being put up daily around that. If you want to know where is a land trust that it might operate in the area where I am, we have a farmland protection directory. And for practitioners, there is a host of information that is, those materials for making the case. Billy mentioned all of our cost of community services studies are there, the economic impact of PACE programs, the economic impact of agricultural generally. There's a wealth of resources, and I just encourage you to go to it and look around. And anytime you need a quick answer about something, there's somebody there to help you. The National Ag Land Network is newly launched. It is intended and geared to practitioners, and that's practitioners who might be in a public agency, state departments of agriculture, soil and water conservation districts. I guess those are probably more considered in the nonprofit world, but county agencies, state departments of natural resources or fish and game, plus nonprofits, anybody who is engaging in agricultural land protection or planning. That we want to provide a space where we can learn from each other, where there is information sharing, and where there is programming that is focused on particular challenges and issues that folks are facing. And so with that, let me go to our last poll here, which is what are the kinds of technical assistance for those who are listening that you all would feel would be the most valuable for us to be providing? Because again, we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We are looking to be as helpful as we can. We imagine that some of the work through the network will be national conversations on particular subjects, but we also want to do more regional programming. And so understanding what folks in a particular state feel would be most valuable will help us on that front. And if there's something that's not listed that you think is important, please feel free to write that in. Okay, Beth, what are we seeing? All right, so absolutely, we can do more around conservation easements and around land transfer and access. I will say that there are some resources on that now on the Farmland Information Center. So if you are looking for something specific, try there. Please also feel free to email me or give me a call. My information is back on the PowerPoint. Beth, if we can go back there. And the network, and please sign up to become a member of the network because you can do so. Go to farmland.org/NALN. And we hope to have many different ways of being helpful to you in your work. And with that, let me turn it back to Billy for last comments.
Thanks, Chris. Want to thank everyone on the call today. If you need to reach me, my email address is bvanpelt@farmland.org. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn to connect if you have questions. And I'll just add a couple of things on our cost of community services studies. American Farmland Trust has done over 80 of these studies across the country, and they all say the same thing. Sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes. Ag uses less in services than it pays in taxes. And your core urban areas are using even less. So the key here is that even though that ag and your core urban areas are creating a net gain on the tax dollar, sprawl is exceeding that, and even they're absorbing that gain and spending beyond that in services. So sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes. And you can go to our farmlandinfo.org website, type in cost of community services studies, and there's a link that will take you to all the studies. The last thing I'll say is, when we were looking at the spatial summary of Louisiana, the map that showed the state with all the best farmland, inland, coastal states that are going to be subject to sea level rise and saltwater intrusion in the future. And as people start to move away from the coast, the farmland that's inland is going to be under greater threat. And that's why we need to protect that farmland now. And that's the perfect segue for Farms Under Threat Phase 3, which will project forward to 2040, examining climate, housing densities, and population increases, and how we mitigate those impacts on farmland and protect farmland for the future. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, and have a great afternoon, everyone.